Too close! Save me! SeaWorld is keeping a close eye on a killer whale blamed for killing a trainer.
The screams of the crowd were drowned out by the thrashing of water. One moment, Dawn Brancheau was waving to a captivated audience. The next, she was pulled into the icy depths of the Orca tank. The attack was swift, brutal, and utterly shocking. But this was not a random act of violence. It was the terrifying climax to a story that began years before, with the capture of a young orca from his family in the wild. Tilikum's journey to SeaWorld was paved with trauma.
When Tilikum arrived at SeaWorld, he was attacked viciously, repeatedly by Katina and others.
And the events of that fateful day were a direct result of a life lived in captivity. From freedom to freak show. It's funny when you think about it, how a creature so powerful, so intelligent, could end up in a concrete pool. Tilikum, whose name means friend in the Chinook language, wasn't born in a tank. He was born in the vast, open waters of the North Atlantic, a prince of the ocean. Imagine the freedom, the endless expanse of the sea, the complex social bonds with his family, his pod. Orcas, or killer whales as they're sometimes called, are incredibly social animals. They communicate through a series of complex clicks and whistles, and their family bonds are for life. They hunt together, play together, and travel for miles and miles every single day. The ocean is their kingdom, and they are its rightful rulers. But for Tilikum, that kingdom was stolen from him when he was just 2 years old. In 1983, off the coast of Iceland, he was captured, ripped away from his mother and his pod. Can you even imagine the terror of that experience? One moment you're swimming freely with your family, and the next you're entangled in a net, hoisted into the air, and transported to a world you can't even comprehend. It's a traumatic experience that would scar any creature for life. And for Tilikum, it was just the beginning of a lifetime of suffering. His first home in captivity was a place called Sealand of the Pacific, a marine park in British Columbia, Canada. It was a far cry from the open ocean. Tilikum was housed with 2 older female orcas, Haida and Nootka, who constantly bullied him. He was the outsider, the newcomer, and they made sure he knew it. He was often raked with their teeth, a common form of aggression among orcas in captivity. The bites would leave deep gashes in his skin, a physical manifestation of his emotional torment. He was a social creature, desperate for connection, but all he found was hostility and isolation. The conditions at Sealand were abysmal. The orcas were kept in a small, enclosed pool for most of the day and night. It's like being forced to live in a closet with your bullies. There was no escape, no respite from the constant torment. And to make matters worse, the trainers at Sealand used food deprivation as a training tool. If one of the orcas didn't perform a trick correctly, all 3 of them would be punished. This only intensified the aggression towards Tilikum, as the 2 females would take out their frustration on him. It's a recipe for disaster, a ticking time bomb. And then, the unthinkable happened. On February 20th, 1991, a young trainer named Kelty Byrne fell into the pool with the 3 orcas. What happened next is a matter of some debate, but the outcome was tragic. Kelty was pulled under the water by the orcas, and she did not resurface. It was the first time an orca in captivity had been involved in a human fatality. And at the center of it all was Tilikum. It was a warning sign, a giant, flashing red light. But did anyone listen? What happened to Tilikum after that first tragic incident would only make things worse. A bigger cage is still a cage. You would think that after the incident at Sealand, people would start to question the wisdom of keeping these powerful predators in captivity. But you'd be wrong. It's all about the money, isn't it? And Tilikum was about to become a very valuable asset. In 1992, Sealand of the Pacific closed its doors for good, and Tilikum was sold to the highest bidder, SeaWorld. For SeaWorld, Tilikum was the ultimate prize. He was the largest orca in captivity, a magnificent specimen that would draw in huge crowds. And he had something else that SeaWorld desperately wanted: his sperm. Tilikum became the cornerstone of SeaWorld's breeding program. Over the years, he sired over 20 offspring, many of whom are still performing in SeaWorld parks today. He was their golden goose, a cash cow that was worth millions and millions of dollars. But what about Tilikum? What about the tormented creature at the center of it all? Did his life get any better at SeaWorld? Not really. It was just a bigger cage. He was still a prisoner, a spectacle for the masses. And his aggressive tendencies didn't just disappear. In July of 1999, another tragedy struck. A man named Daniel P. Dukes, who had been arrested for shoplifting the day before, somehow managed to stay in the park after it closed. He was found the next morning in Tilikum's tank. He was unclothed and his body was covered in bruises and abrasions. The official cause of his passing was drowning, but it was clear that Tilikum had been involved. It was another warning sign, another red flag. But still, the show went on. It's incredible, isn't it? The lengths that people will go to for entertainment. Tilikum was involved in 2 human fatalities, and yet he was still performing day after day. He was still the star of the show. And then came Dawn Brancheau. Dawn was a veteran trainer at SeaWorld, one of the best in the business. She had a passion for animals, and she had a special connection with Tilikum. She was his favorite trainer, the one he would respond to the most. They had a bond, a connection that seemed to defy the odds. But on that fateful day in February of 2010, something went terribly wrong. The details of what happened are truly horrific. Dawn was performing a Dine with Shamu show with Tilikum, a more intimate, up-close and personal experience for a small group of guests. At the end of the show, she was on a platform interacting with Tilikum, and then without warning, he grabbed her by her ponytail and pulled her into the water. The attack was brutal and sustained. Tilikum didn't just drown her, he inflicted horrific injuries. It was a scene of pure chaos and terror. And it all happened in front of a live audience. The story that SeaWorld told was that Dawn's ponytail had distracted the whale, that it was a tragic accident. But there were whispers, rumors, that there was more to the story, that Tilikum's aggression had been building for years, and that SeaWorld had been covering it up. The truth about what happened that day is even more disturbing than the official story. The truth comes out. The passing of Dawn Brancheau was a turning point. It was a tragedy that could no longer be ignored. The world was watching and people were starting to ask questions. And then came the documentary Blackfish. Released in 2013, Blackfish was a bombshell. It exposed the dark side of the captive whale industry, the cruelty, the lies, and the cover-ups. It told the story of Tilikum, from his capture in the wild to his tragic life in captivity. And it featured interviews with former SeaWorld trainers who spoke out against the company and its practices. The impact of Blackfish was immediate and profound. It was a cultural phenomenon. People were outraged. They started to see SeaWorld not as a happy, family-friendly theme park, but as a prison for intelligent, sentient beings. The public perception of SeaWorld shifted dramatically. Attendance at their parks plummeted. Major corporate sponsors, like Southwest Airlines, pulled their support. The company's stock price tanked. The Blackfish effect, as it came to be known, was a powerful force. SeaWorld, of course, went on the defensive. They launched a massive PR campaign to try and discredit the film and its message. They called it propaganda and emotionally manipulative. But the damage was done. The truth was out there, and there was no putting the genie back in the bottle. The film sparked a global movement against the captivity of whales and dolphins. People started to demand change, and slowly but surely, things started to change. In 2016, SeaWorld announced that it would be ending its orca breeding program. The orcas currently in their care would be the last generation to live in captivity. It was a huge victory for animal rights activists, a testament to the power of public pressure. But what about the orcas themselves? What about Tilikum? For him, it was too little, too late. He remained in his concrete pool at SeaWorld Orlando, a living symbol of a cruel and outdated form of entertainment. He passed away in January of 2017 from a persistent and complicated bacterial lung infection. He was 36 years old. In the wild, Male orcas can live to be over 50 or 60. His life was cut short, a life filled with suffering and tragedy, but his legacy lives on. He is the whale that changed the world, the whale that opened our eyes to the cruelty of captivity. But the story doesn't end there. There are still so many questions that remain unanswered. A flawed system. It's easy to paint Tilikum as the villain in this story. But the thing is, he's not. He's a victim. He was a wild animal, ripped from his natural habitat and forced to live a life that was completely unnatural for him. The real villain in this story is the system that allowed this to happen. The captive whale industry is a multi-billion-dollar business, and it's built on the suffering of these intelligent social creatures. Think about it. In the wild, orcas swim up to 100 miles a day. In captivity, they're confined to tanks that are the equivalent of a human living in a bathtub. They're forced to perform unnatural tricks for food. They're separated from their families. They're subjected to constant stress and boredom. It's a life of deprivation and misery. And is it any wonder that they sometimes snap? The thing that most people don't realize is that there has never been a documented case of an orca in the wild seriously harming a human. Not one. The only instances of orca aggression towards humans have occurred in captivity. That should tell you everything you need to know. These are not monsters. They are highly intelligent, emotionally complex creatures who are being driven to the brink by the unnatural and cruel conditions of their confinement. So, are we, the paying public, to blame? It's a tough question to answer. For years, we flocked to these parks, eager to see these magnificent creatures up close. We were entertained by their tricks and their acrobatics, but we were also ignorant. We didn't know the full story. We didn't know the price that these animals were paying for our entertainment. But now we do, and we have a choice. We can continue to support an industry that is built on cruelty and exploitation, or we can demand a better future for these animals. The science is clear. Orcas do not belong in captivity. They are not ours to use for entertainment. They are wild animals who deserve to live free in the ocean. And until we recognize that, until we shut down these parks for good, the tragedy of Tilikum and Dawn Brancheau is destined to be repeated. Is it possible that we are missing a key detail in all of this? Are we sure that Tilikum was the only one to blame? The story of Dawn Brancheau and Tilikum is a tragic one, a cautionary tale about the consequences of our actions. But what if there's more to it? What if the official story is just a cover-up for something much darker? Like and subscribe for more stories that will make you question everything.